精神の隙間を知れだの、命の勝ち負けを知れだの、意味を汲み取らないまま鵜呑みにして、当然のように繰り返した。それがどう評価されるものなのか、俺にはわからない。ただ、知らなければ。外のことなんて知らなければ、悩むことなく、自分はそこに居続けられたと思う。
あなたの嫌いな生き死にの真似を続けて。
Well, he didn't respond to her question. From then on, they continued walking in silence. Aoko couldn't stop thinking about all the contradictions and absurdities in what he'd said.
Yeah.
The imbalance in his education, for one. His knowledge of the basics of human life was thorough, yet he knew next to nothing about modern technology. He always said he wasn't good at socializing, but he seemed accustomed to talking and discussion. His upbringing couldn't have happened that way by chance. It was most certainly an environment purposefully constructed according to a play by some third party. Aoko had no idea what that plan could be or who the third party was, though. Why would anyone want to create someone with a background like Soujuuro's? Was it all part of a grander plan, or was there really a place deep in the mountains where it was normal to live like that? He'd asked about this once in his hometown, in his home in the mountains, apparently. When he expressed his confusion, an elder had taken him aside, saying, "This is just how things have always been around here, boy. There's no reason to keep doing it, but there's no reason to stop." With a laugh, the elder chose a new identity and life outside the mountains for young Soujuuro and sent him off to live on his own.
Oh, because there was no reason for him to actually stay there, I guess? That's weird.
I guess if you need to do a job, you get sent off the mountain and you don't come back.
I guess.
And if you question why you're there in the first place, you get sent off the mountain.
Maybe.
Aoko's home loomed at the end of their path. It was a generic home without any real distinguishing features, apart from the light that was apparently, warm, that was coming from it. It seemed as if a house from town had been picked up and dropped here. One could imagine the residents were peaceful people who engaged in farming and raising animals in their spare time.
Yeah, well, I doubt that.
Gazing at what lay before him, Soujuuro finally opened his mouth to answer Aoko's earlier question.
自分にはできなかった。知らなければよかったのに知ってしまったから。その後は簡単だ。泣けない鳥はいらないと言われた。今まで疑いもなくできたことを、意味を知っただけでできなくなったものはいらないと。どんなに山にいたくても、できないのなら意味がない。俺は意味を知った瞬間に、意味を信じることができなくなった。だから山を降りたんだ。けれど、どうなんだろう。そこではそうすることだけが全てだった。そうすることだけしか教えられなかった。だから。
There'd been only one problem with his life in the mountains. Him, for having questioned it. It was all his mistake. He muttered as much to himself, his voice dripping with criticism. In Aoko's opinion, the world he described was, in a sense, perfect.
Yes?
The best situation to achieve a goal is one in which all elements extraneous to that goal have been removed. As long as the people involved have no concept of morality, they'll consider the immoral to be completely correct. Now, even such correctness would be foreign in concept. Only one thing was for sure. The world he'd come from was frozen in time. That was what made Soujuuro's tragedy possible. A world of wrongdoing and mistakes. It created a human riddled with mistakes as well. Soujuuro understood that it was wrong, and yet he still thought it beautiful, even now. Regardless of what the truth behind it might have been, he considered that world perfect. He only blamed himself for having learned what existed outside that world. He himself had said he could still be living there happily.
知らなければよかったのに。
He surely felt the weight of the sinful words he spoke more deeply than anyone else. That's why he still wondered. What had gone awry? Whose fault was it, really? He didn't want to answer these questions alone. He wanted her to state it clearly for him. There was a moment of silence that felt like an eternity before she spoke.
私には答えられないわ。
Well,
Her reply came quietly. It wasn't that she didn't have an answer, it was that she couldn't tell him. It was a struggle for her to tell such a bold-faced lie. He reflected deeply on what she said. He knew right away that her words were coming from a place of kindness.
そうだな。君の最初の優しさが今でよかった。
A pleasant look floated across his face, at which Aoko could only scowl.
何よそれ。まるで普段から優しくないみたいじゃない。
青崎は優しくないじゃないか。
She found herself unable to offer any protest against such a blunt statement. It was because she knew he was right.
そうね。優しくなんかないわね、私。
Soujuuro smiled in response to her vaguely sad consent, as if to say, "Told you so." His indulgent smirk arose from his sense of personal pride in the situation. It was both warm-hearted and uncomfortable, causing Aoko to instantly regret her question. If only she'd asked about something else, something random that didn't matter, then she would never have ended up in a mood like this. Only a few minutes remained until their path came to an end. Surrounded by a wooden fence, the house resembled an inn for passing travelers in winter. The light spilling out from the window brought to mind images of a lively dinner table, quite the opposite of the current mood between the
ごめん。
two.
悪いこと聞いちゃって。
Aoko stopped at the entrance to the yard. She'd felt compelled to apologize, even though it was the last time they'd speak. Or perhaps because it was the last time. Soujuro's only response was to shrug it off as if it were no problem.
話途中なのにね。
yeah.
He looked up at the house they'd hiked so far to reach, his breath hanging white in the air. All signs of gloom were gone from Soujuro's face as he nodded.
自分も話してみてようやく振り向けたと思う。だから青崎には感謝してるよ。
Shame I won't remember that tomorrow.
それに、これはもう終わったことだ。続きを話すのはまた機会があった時にしよう。
He turned his head to face Aoko with an ephemeral smile. He was his usual nonchalant self, same as every other day. Aoko prayed that day would never come. For her own peace of mind, but also for the well-being of this very unique boy.
もっとも、そんな機会はもう来ないか。
Then she pointed in the direction of a cave hidden by a small forest on the other side of the house.
あそこ、
Yeah.
ちょっとした洞穴があるの。そこに祖父がいるから、行って。本当はもっと違った話が聞きたかったけど、仕方ないか。魔法は12時になると切れちゃうものだしね。
A sarcastic grin spread across her face as she spoke. And so, Soujuuro walked off, totally clueless as to what fairy tale she was referencing. The forest felt so far from the house to Aoko that it was like a different place on Earth altogether. In reality, it wasn't far at all, only 5 minutes away.
さよなら、しずきくん。
She said it to herself as she watched him simply walk away without turning back. Though he wasn't meant to hear her words of parting, they apparently reached his ears anyway.
ああ、じゃあまた明日、町のどこかで。
Wow.
He raised his hand in farewell and then disappeared into the forest, one of them taking this far more seriously than the other.
Well.
I mean, you could tell just in their parting.
Yeah, I know.
She's using a very permanent
Yeah.
parting, and he's like, "Yeah, see ya.
Well,
Till tomorrow."
he's confident they'll run into each other in town again, even if it's under different circumstances.
As soon as she was sure he was gone, she turned her gaze to the sky. That night, the stars were even more beautiful than the moon. He'd been looking at her fondly only moments before, and now he was gone into the forest with only a brief word of parting. It didn't feel real. And with that, she finally understood, if a little too late to matter. She understood who'd truly been the strange and unusual one. Him.
It's still him.
Yeah. Anyone could have ended up behaving like Soujuuro, but not many could keep talking on and on the way he did. Everything he'd done was now perfectly sensible in light of his former life in the mountains. As a magician, she was supposed to make miracles happen. But he'd arrived at a miracle of his own through the trials and tribulations of following what he considered to be common sense.
素手で熊を倒すなんて私にはどう転んでもできないし。
Yeah.
It was pretty impressive. Soujuro's own magic was so mundane to him that it made him depressed to talk about it, but even so, it was the kind of brilliance only possessed by humans. She pulled her eyes back down from the starry sky and began to walk. The lights were on inside the entrance and the door wasn't locked. Aoko rolled up her sleeves and checked the time. 1 hour left till midnight.
She rolled up both of her sleeves to check her watch?
She's got the hour on one wrist and the minute on the other. She has to check both wrists. She just barely managed to satisfy her parents' request to visit before the end of the year.
Oh.
Placing her hand on the door, she took a deep breath. She promptly stifled the faint affection and sadness she'd been feeling. It was her first time back in 2 years. Upon entering high school, she'd begun living on her own, hence the past 2 years away from home. And how they flew by. For some reason, the memories began to race through her mind. There she stood, one hand on the door, reflecting on the past. Once the door was open, she'd be staring at her future instead. Her hand holding the doorknob began to move. She was met with the warm scene she expected, though strangely different than that of her memories. It was comforting to encounter something familiar after being away for so long. And so it was with small, unspoken gratitude that Aoko returned to her home. Without stopping to ring the doorbell, she called out with a smile, "I'm home."
Whoop. Yeah.
The moment Soujuuro stepped inside, he was struck with a strange feeling of familiarity. It wasn't mere nostalgia either. No, it reached further back into the past. It was a feeling from far beyond what he could even imagine. He was reminded of someone, but he couldn't remember who. Maybe he was only reminded of himself, or maybe of the old man before him now in the cavern. It appeared to be an old man anyway. Soujuuro couldn't make out any details beyond a vague outline.
Weird.
As far as he could tell, the figure didn't seem to have anything in the way of a face capable of making expressions. All he knew was the smoke-like figure before him was the one Aoko called grandfather. Though hoarse, the old man's voice was powerful, and it rung through the cavern. I'm sorry, are you a Grail? Grail-kun, is that you?
What is it you wish for?
でも聞きたいことは一つあります。どうして二人を争わせたんですか？
それは私の外で起きた物語だ。答えることはできない。
そう仕向けたのはあなただと聞きました。
星の巡りだ。あれらは相入れない才能を与えられ、あのような形でしか噛み合えない人間だ。だが、
Oh, yeah.
確かに衝突を避ける余地はあった。あれらの意志が凡庸であったか、あるいは破格のものであったのなら、多くの不順に耐えただろう。君のように自己の崩壊が見えていても共存を尊ぶように。 しかし娘たちはそれを選ばなかった。
彼女たちが争うのは彼女たちのせいだって言うんですね。その原因はあなたにあるのに。
そうだ。あれらの争いはあれらの性を表すもの。
ゼロ？形がないということですか？
形ではなく意味がない。私という起因から起こり、娘たちが一つの命を得た時点で私は舞台から消え失せた。その後の因は常に娘たちから生じたものだ。私の介入はない。
Wait, everything occurring since was born. Oh, since...
Everything
Ah,
occurring
yes.
since they were born.
Or no,
was-
since he left was born of the girls themselves.
Well, that can't be possible because he had already left before they were born.
Well, I know, but I
and
think I think he's referring to not them being born, but everything like everything that happened started because of their own inner nature.
今回
So, like, the
どちら
events
が
being
時間を終わらせても、あるいは両者が終わらせても、私には無価値だった。
Huh.
いや、元より無価値だ。私に価値を与える命はまだ生まれていない。
What?
あれらがどうなろうとやるべきことは変わらない。
青子が生きていても死んでいても跡継ぎを作るということですか？
おそらくこの体が消えないのはそういうことだ。
The steamy energy that filled the cavern made Sojuro's head reel. The moment Aoko and Toko were born, their grandfather seemed to have completely forgotten that they were his granddaughters. It was hard to imagine a satisfactory Aozaki heir ever being born.
Huh.
No amount of power would satisfy the old man. He showed no signs of compromise or restraint.
青子はそのために過去を捨てたのに。
There was nothing but silence. However, this short moment of quiet would occur only once. The unreadable outline of the old man grew blurrier still. Long, long ago, an unfortunate child once wandered into the cave. The old man automatically granted its request, born from purity and ignorance. He was a magician who'd given up his ego in order to extend his own lifespan, and he did whatever he could to help the child. It had been an incredible coincidence to happen that day. The child glared at the old man with tear-filled eyes at the sight of all the horrible things that had been brought about. Everything will be lost, completely, without any warning, all because of the failure of a nobody like you. The child threw a tantrum at how unfair it all was. The magician claimed that was merely the way of the world. The child stood up to him. "Shut up, old man." And then... yes, just at that moment, the child ran around in tears, trying to make the old man pay for the cost of a life. The cost of all the lives.
それは間違いだ、少年。
Perhaps that's how it happened.
捨てたのではない。それを美しくするために、あれは生きているのだ。
That role had likely come to an end long ago, however. The old man's appearance seemed to change before Sojuro's eyes. For just a brief moment he wavered in the air as if in a haze.
君の過ちを正そう。娘たちは私というものをよく分かっている。ともすれば、私本人より理解しているとも言える。私が娘たちの人格を考慮せぬように、娘たちもまた私というものの人格を認めていない。祖父さえいなかったのならという考えさえないだろう。あれらはそもそも争い合う自分たちを一度も卑下はしないはずだ。 君にその関係を分かれというのは酷だろうが。尋ね事は終わったようだ。次は私の番だ。君の名前を知りたい。
Soujuuro answered the old man's question. The smoky face seemed to frown, quivering ever so slightly.
意外だ。君は孤立しているというのに、複数を示す名がついているとは思わなかった。
Right?
Yeah, it's like there's 9 others.
At
Soujuuro and...
Well, maybe. I mean, I don't know how they were named exactly, because I thought Soujuuro was raised at a temple or something.
Yeah, in the mountains.
Yeah, but I don't think Shizuki was raised in a temple. He was raised like in the woods. I don't know if they even had that much structure. He's been really vague about that.
I wonder if there's ever been any kind of like confirmation on that.
I
Like,
don't know if it's official.
If Natsu ever said anything.
I kind of doubt it, because aren't there still more parts of this to come? I do know that Nasu has stated definitively that Soujuuro is at the time he comes off the mountain and throughout the course of the story the strongest Type Moon protagonist. Huh.
Like above and beyond anything that, you know, Shiki or Shiro was capable of.
Huh. Wow.
Which is...
That's a statement.
Sure something. I know Kuzuki was based off of the original novel design of Soujuuro.
Oh, yeah, I know he's used, like, the same archetypes for different characters going forward.
But I thought I saw somebody at some point mention that in an interview at one point, Nasu had implied very strongly that Soujuuro and Kuzuki were intended to have come from the same, you know, background, the same environment.
I don't know if that's officially stated or not, or if that was just similar ideas for a character.
似合わん。全く似合わん。だがそちらでは正しいことだ。不釣り合いな場所にいるのなら、不釣り合いな名が必要だ。